They used to put out there in the Old West a wanted poster. It said, wanted, dead or alive. All I want, America wants him brought to justice.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 20 notorious FBI most wanted fugitives.
He has no right to be walking free anywhere, not in Mexico, not in any place in the United States.
For this list, we're looking at the most infamous individuals to have appeared on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list since its inception in 1950. Which of these fugitives had you never heard of before? Let us know in the comments. Number 20, Ramzi Yousef.
The Bulger plot was very much a proof of concept for Al-Qaeda.
Almost a decade before 9/11, the World Trade Center was hit with a terrorist attack that claimed 6 lives and left more than 1,000 injured. Ramzi Yousef, one of the brains behind the 1993 incident, fled the U.S. just hours later and was subsequently added to the FBI's list. During his period at large, Yousef masterminded what is now known as the Bulger plot, which included a plan to assassinate Pope John Paul II and attack 11 planes en route to the United States.
The idea was to create confusion with the assassination of the Pope, experts say, and then quickly launch your second phase.
Although detailed, the plan failed, and Yousef was later arrested after one of his former associates ratted him out. He was extradited to the U.S., where he is currently behind bars for life. Number 19, Ruth Eisman Scheer. The first woman to ever appear on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, Eisman Scheer and her boyfriend Gary Stephen Christ orchestrated the kidnapping of heiress Barbara Jane Mackle in 1968. The two criminals abducted Mackle from her hotel room and took her to a remote area, where they buried her in a ventilated box for more than 3 days. Luckily, Mackle was rescued in relatively good condition. Christ was apprehended just 2 days later.
And applied for a job at Central State Hospital. And when you go to work for the hospital, you have to be fingerprinted and a background check.
It would take the better part of 3 months for Eisman Scheer to be caught. But after it finally happened, she spent 4 years in prison and was deported to her home country of Honduras. Number 18, Jason Derek Brown. Before he was included on the FBI's Most Wanted list, Jason Derek Brown was a seemingly successful businessperson with a taste for the expensive. In reality, he was deeply in debt and involved in various sketchy schemes. His apparent life of luxury came to an end in November of 2004 when he carried out a heist of an armored car outside a movie theater, killing the guard.
This was just a cold-blooded ambush in which the suspect was waiting for this man.
Brown fled the scene and bounced around the U.S. before disappearing completely. His surfer dude looks have led to supposed sightings of him all around the country, the majority of which have turned out to be false.
The FBI has more tips on Brown than any other fugitive on the Most Wanted list.
Brown is currently still at large and is thought to be residing either in Salt Lake City or far away in another country. Number 17, James Charles Kopp. Nicknamed Atomic Dog, James Charles Kopp was closely affiliated with anti-abortion militants, including the Christian Lambs of Christ. In 1998, he fatally shot physician Barnett Slepian in his own home. Dr. Slepian provided abortion services for several New York communities.
Outrage. I don't think any of us are fearful for our lives. We are outraged that somebody would have the audacity and the just terrible gall to come in and do that to another human being.
After committing the murder, Kopp fled the U.S., moving to Mexico and Ireland before landing in France in March of 2001. 2 weeks later, he was arrested by French police and extradited to the U.S. He's serving a lifetime sentence without the possibility of parole. Police suspect that he was also responsible for the murder of several other doctors in the U.S. and Canada. Number 16, Leslie Isbin Rogie. Bank robber Leslie Isbin Rogie was the first ever criminal on the FBI list apprehended thanks to the internet.
He loved boats. He's probably around the water somewhere. He's probably got a bush bear in his hand.
Rogie built his criminal career on bank robberies across the U.S., from Florida to Missouri. He was caught and convicted in 1984, but escaped the following year to commit even more robberies.
If they really wanted to find him, all they would have to do is go into the areas where they think he is and probably run a special on bush bear, and he'd come by it.
In all, Rogi robbed over 24 banks and made away with over $2 million.
His travels, financed with stolen cashier's checks, have taken him from Belhaven, North Carolina, to Charleston, South Carolina, to Hendersonville, North Carolina, always just a step ahead of police.
He remained on the run for several years before his picture on the FBI's website was recognized by someone in Guatemala, who alerted the local authorities. Rogi will remain locked up until 2034, when he will be 94 years old. Number 15, Eric Rudolph. Another anti-abortion militant, Eric Rudolph was behind the Centennial Olympic Park bombing during the 1996 Summer Olympics.
And nobody's bothering you, right?
Well, he also bombed 2 abortion clinics and a lesbian bar. For 5 years, he hid in the Appalachian wilderness, but in 2003, he was arrested at a grocery store in North Carolina. He pleaded guilty to all charges, including murder, and revealed that he had hidden 250 pounds of dynamite in the forest. Unrepentant, he has written essays from prison promoting violence, published online by Christian terrorist organization Army of God.
He didn't change a thing.
No, except that his actions destroyed a lot of lives, including his.
Number 14, Warren Jeffs.
You don't know any better until you get away from it. And getting away from it is the hard part.
The Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a radical denomination of the Mormon Church that still preaches polygamy. When he took over as president of the church, Warren Jeffs married nearly all of his father's widows and took strict control over who his followers married. His regime was fraught with allegations of assault, and he was responsible for arranging marriages between adult men and minors.
Warren had himself 78 wives. 24 of those wives were underage.
After appearing on the FBI Most Wanted list for just 4 months, Jeffs was arrested at a traffic stop and tried for his crimes in Utah, Arizona, and Texas. He is currently serving a life sentence in Texas.
There were 10 women on that jury, and there were 2 men, and I've always maintained that it was a good thing for Warren Jeffs that there were a bunch of Texas Rangers in that courtroom, because after those 10 women heard that audio tape, they would have jumped over the railings and killed Warren with their bare hands.
Number 13, Alexis Flores. In 2000, a drifter going by the name Carlos was working as a handyman in a neighborhood in Philadelphia. That summer, the body of a missing girl was found in the apartment building where Carlos lived, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. 4 years later, Alexis Flores was arrested for forgery in Arizona and jailed for 60 days, before he was deported back to his home country of Honduras. After his deportation, DNA samples taken from Flores in Arizona matched those from the murder case in Philadelphia, proving that Carlos was, in fact, Flores. He was added to the FBI's list soon after and is currently believed to be hiding either in Honduras or somewhere in the U.S. Number 12, Juan Garcia Abrego. The first drug trafficker to appear on the FBI's list, Juan Garcia Abrego gained notoriety as the ruthless leader of the Gulf Cartel. After taking over the reins of the cartel from his uncle, Garcia Abrego transformed it into one of the most expansive crime syndicates along the U.S.-Mexico border. He shipped not only drugs into the U.S., but also millions of dollars to be laundered. With such an infamous reputation, he was added to the FBI's list in 1995 and apprehended almost a year later on a ranch in Mexico. He was tried on 22 counts of money laundering and drug trafficking and bagged himself 11 consecutive life sentences in the slammer. Number 11, Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez. Speaking of the Gulf Cartel, they feuded heavily with another Mexican syndicate called the Beltran-Leyva Cartel. As part of their ongoing rivalry, the Gulf Cartel arranged to have the father of Jose Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez murdered. Villarreal Hernandez, who was a Beltran-Leyva boss, sought to enact his revenge, but not on any of his rival drug lords. Instead, he targeted Juan Jesus Guerrero Chapa, the Gulf Cartel's lawyer who represented their leader. In May 2013, Guerrero was tracked down to South Lake, Texas, and assassinated by Villarreal Hernandez's men. Investigation by the authorities traced the murder plot back to Villarreal Hernandez, who has since fallen off the grid. Number 10, Thomas James Holden. Over the last 70 years, more than 500 names have graced the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives list. Thomas James Holden was the very first. A career criminal, Holden first appeared on the FBI's radar as one half of the notorious Holden Keating gang. Together with Francis Keating, he went on a robbery spree in the Midwest throughout the 1920s and 30s, targeting payroll deliveries, trains, and banks. Shortly after his second stint in prison, Holden shot his wife and her 2 brothers after a drunken night and fled the scene. The following year, he appeared as the first fugitive on the FBI's inaugural list. He was eventually captured and thrown right back in prison. Number 9. Víctor Manuel Gerena. With a record 32 years, Víctor Manuel Gerena remains the fugitive with the longest amount of time spent on the most wanted list. While working as an armored car guard for Wells Fargo in 1983, Gerena and his accomplices pulled off a heist of $7 million from the company's depot. This became the biggest cash theft carried out on U.S. soil at the time. Gerena escaped to Mexico soon after the robbery and hasn't been seen since then. He was added to the FBI's list the following year and remained there until he was taken off in 2016. While many of his co-conspirators have since been apprehended, the whereabouts of Víctor Manuel Gerena remain unsolved. Number 8. William Bradford Bishop Jr. Before the horrific events of March 1, 1976, William Bradford Bishop Jr. lived the American dream. The Yale alum and former diplomat was married to his high school sweetheart and was the father to 3 boys.
You know, you would have thought that they were the perfect family. They seemed to be very happy.
After finding out he was passed over for a promotion on that fateful day, Bishop returned home and allegedly murdered his family as well as his mother. For decades, the feds have combed through lead after lead, but have turned up nothing in their search for Bishop.
One of the rangers noticed the car, and he thought that maybe it was a backpacker. They run the plate, and turned out that guy was wanted by the FBI.
From 2014 to 2018, Bishop was named as one of the 10 most wanted fugitives, but he was kicked off the list in favor of more dangerous people. Number 7. Leonard Peltier. The criminal case of Leonard Peltier is one that has been heavily debated for decades.
I'll be an old man when I get out.
An activist and member of the American Indian movement, Peltier appeared on the most wanted list for his involvement in the killing of 2 FBI agents at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. He was arrested just 2 months later in Canada and extradited back to the U.S., where he was tried and convicted. Peltier's trial raised several questions concerning the evidence presented and the witness testimonies, some of which have since been recanted.
Witnesses were coerced by the FBI into saying they saw Peltier shoot the agents. Ballistics evidence that could have aided Leonard's defense was hidden from his lawyers.
Despite clemency appeals from several human rights groups and key political figures, Peltier's convictions, 2 life sentences and additional time for a 1979 prison escape, still stand. Number 6. Rafael Caro Quintero. The whopping $20 million reward for information leading to the capture of Rafael Caro Quintero was at the time the largest offered for an FBI most wanted fugitive. One of the founders of the Guadalajara cartel, Caro Quintero went to prison in 1985 for his role in the murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena Salazar.
What the f*** were they thinking? They could kill an American government agent and get away with it?
He was released in 2013 after a state tribunal in Mexico ruled that he should have been tried for murder in a state, not federal court.
How could this drug lord be released from prison without the United States knowing?
We are extremely disappointed, and more than that, we are angry.
After outrage from the Obama administration, the Mexican government issued a new arrest warrant a few days later, but Caro Quintero was long gone. He was finally arrested again in Mexico on July 15, 2022. Number 5. Semyon Mogilevich.
He has contacts in various industries. He's a highly educated man. He's definitely a different type of mobster now.
Arms trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, contract murders. These are just a few of the criminal charges leveled against Russian mafia boss Semyon Mogilevich.
He has access to so much, including funding, including other criminal organizations, that he can, with a telephone call, affect the global economy.
Described by the FBI as, quote, the most dangerous mobster in the world, Mogilevich was placed on the most wanted list in 2009 after scamming millions of dollars from investors of a Canadian company he oversaw.
Investors lost millions into the pockets of Mogilevich and his associates.
It was a long shot, as the feds knew he had high-profile connections in Russia and was living freely in Moscow. Due to the lack of an extradition treaty between Russia and the U.S., Mogilevich was taken off the list in 2015, but he is still being actively pursued by the FBI. Number 4. James Whitey Bulger. One of the most notorious mob bosses ever to spring out of Boston, James Whitey Bulger was the leader of the Winter Hill Gang.
You threatening me, Bulger?
The last thing I would do if I was planning to harm you is to warn you in advance, you dumb f***.
Bulger had his hands in multiple criminal enterprises, such as racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and even murder. Yet he worked as an FBI informant against other mobs. Facing impending prosecution, he fled Boston and remained in hiding for 16 years. During this period, he was added to the list and was at one time the second most wanted man in the U.S. behind only Osama bin Laden. After he was apprehended in 2011, Bulger was convicted of his many crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2018, he met his demise at the hands of other inmates. Number 3. Theodore Ted Bundy. One of the most infamous serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy was responsible for the deaths of at least 30 women in the 1970s. He was arrested in 1975, but managed to escape from prison twice, killing even more women while he was on the run. Bundy used his charm and good looks to lure his victims in, before assaulting them and taking their lives. After his second escape from prison, his name was added to the FBI's list. He only spent 5 days on the list before he was arrested at a traffic stop. Following 2 highly publicized trials, Bundy was found guilty of 3 murders and was executed by electric chair in 1989.
Ted Bundy is dead!
Number 2. James Earl Ray. Already a convicted armed robber and fraudster, James Earl Ray gained notoriety for his 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Ray, who had escaped from prison the previous year, ran up north to Canada and laid low for a while.
2 months after the murder, a Scotland Yard detective in London's airport recognized Ray from his mugshot and detained the killer of an American icon.
After a few months on the run, Ray was arrested in London and sent back to the U.S. to stand trial for his crime. There, he pleaded guilty to King's murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison.
The mystery, the enigma about James Earl Ray is, to this day, we don't know exactly why he did it.
Having appeared on the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives in 1968, Ray's name resurfaced on the list in 1977 when he escaped from prison with 6 other inmates. He was recaptured 3 days later and died in prison at the age of 70. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. Osama bin Laden. USA! USA! As the founder of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden was responsible for masterminding several terrorist attacks. Although most infamous for the events of September 11, 2001, bin Laden originally appeared on the FBI's list 2 years earlier. His inclusion was as a result of his involvement in the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. After the 9/11 attacks, bin Laden became the most wanted man in the world, with the FBI placing a $25 million bounty on his head. Bin Laden managed to evade capture for more than a decade, but met his end in May 2011 when he was shot and killed by U.S. military forces in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.